Well, it's quite dark at the front here, so I may be creatively making up my message because I forgot how to read my own writing since about 18 months ago, and I can't really see it very well either, so all going well so far, isn't it? This is honestly like a massive privilege to be able to do this. I spent last weekend in Glasgow with my Bible going, what on earth shall I do? And when you've got the whole Bible, and it feels like this momentous occasion, not just for me, but for us as God's church in this place, there's a big kind of what shall I do? And it probably ought to be really significant. And when you've got the whole Bible, it's worse than just somebody saying, you need to do Leviticus 19, because at least you know where you're starting from if you do that. But it'll be no surprise to most of you, because you've known me a really long time, and I've known you a really long time as well. That for this particular occasion, I want to take us to the Old Testament, and I feel really chuffed that on the point where I'm leaving you doing the Old Testament, I feel like that's a success. I'm like chalking that up for a success. And I particularly want us to go back to the time of the exile and the prophets. I need to remember to click and speak through the mic all at the same time. So as Phil said last Sunday, because I listen to him, because I'm wise now, the experience that we've had over these past 18 months is not as extreme as the exile. We were not plundered from our homes, abandoning everything that had ever belonged to us and taking a couple of 1,000 miles to live in a different context and culture under an extreme and oppressive rulership. So it's not as quite as extreme as that. But it is a useful image, isn't it, for us to use at this time. Because the exile was a time of crisis for the people of God. It was a time of crisis for the people of God. Some of you have heard me say this before, because everything familiar was ripped away from them. And they were left feeling uncertain, destabilised, dispersed, discouraged, and left asking some extremely profound questions about who is God? We believe that God is powerful for all of our lives. We believe that He is faithful to us. But where is He now? And what does it look like to trust in God right now in the midst of this crisis that we are experiencing, when it doesn't seem like God is powerful anymore? When it doesn't seem that perhaps He's faithful anymore, when it doesn't seem like He's quite behaving in the way that we are comfortable with. Who is God? And who are we as the people of God? Because the people of God in that time was linked to the land of Israel, and to the temple, and to worship in the temple. So who were they when they found themselves in Babylon, in a strange land where people spoke a different language, and there was no temple, and it was not the promised land? Who are we as the people of God? And maybe we have asked ourselves that question over these past months that have gone behind us. Who are we? When we can't worship in our churches and we can't sing songs together, and you know that's actually my favourite thing to do in the wide world. Who are we as the people of God right now? Everything that they thought they knew was disrupted, and it was time to think differently. Everything they thought they knew was disrupted, and it was time to think differently. We've said this before, but the word crisis in Chinese is made up of two characters, because that's how they form their words. And it's two characters, and the first one means danger, and the second one means opportunity. And this is such a moment for us as the people of God, is it not? I have not spent 27 years training you to say yes, Lisa. This is such a moment for us as the people of God. It is a moment of danger. Not just COVID danger, but the danger that everything we've known has been disrupted, and we found ourselves pursuing a slightly different pattern of life. but it is also, and perhaps more importantly, a moment of opportunity, a once-in-a-generation moment of opportunity for God's people to ask themselves, who is God and who are we in this moment? And into this moment, Isaiah speaks prophetically and directly to the hearts and minds of God's people. And I want to read to you some really familiar verses from Isaiah chapter 43. And if you've got a Bible or electronic device, you may turn to it. Isaiah 43 and verse 16. I really feel like I need more arms. Right. This is what the Lord says. He who made a way through the sea, a path through the mighty waters, who drew out the chariots and horses, the army and reinforcements together, and they lay there never to rise again, extinguished, snuffed out like a wick. Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the desert and streams in the wasteland. The wild animals honour me, the jackals and the owls, because I provide water in the desert and streams in the wasteland, to give drink to my people, my chosen, the people I form for myself, that they may proclaim my praise. And so in verse 16 we start there with a really familiar story, and it is the story of the Exodus. And we know that story, don't we? That they have been slaves in Egypt under Pharaoh, and then Moses comes along very unenthusiastically, and God says, going to lead my people out of Egypt into the promised land. They get to the Red Sea, the Egyptian armies on their tails, and they go, oh my goodness, there's a big, big river here. How do we get through this? And God miraculously parts the waters, and they walk through the sea. And then he miraculously closes the waters, and the Egyptian armies are destroyed behind them, and they walk forward into the purposes of God. This is their defining story. It is their defining story. It's exciting, it's dramatic, it is miraculous. It forms them from slaves to free people. It demonstrates to them the presence, the power, and the provision of God. It is their defining story. It features throughout the bigger story of the Old Testament and even into the New Testament. It is the big story, and it features in their experience. It reveals so much to them of the character, the ways, and the purpose of God. It was so, so important to them as they thought about the presence and the power and the provision and the protection of God, that they thought about this story. The Exodus, it was their story. Some of you will remember the Falklands conflict. Some of you will have read it in a history book. And there was a guy there who became, I don't know if poster boy is the most appropriate word to use really, but he became someone that we looked to after that conflict, as someone who had endured much and suffered much, and had come through the other side of that. His name was Simon Weston. And he says these words: if you constantly dwell on the past, that's where you end up living. Now, not everyone could say that, but I think that he has a right to say that. Because I'm sure that it wasn't easy to put pain and hurt and disappointment behind him, and to stop being defined by that conflict, that battle, that injury. But he knew that he couldn't be defined just by that one thing. That he needed to move forward into the rest of his life and not live in the past. It isn't always easy for us to do that, is it? Please don't hear me say that I think it is, because I don't think it is. But sometimes we need to walk that journey intentionally into a new future. To be able to put down pain, to put down hurt and disappointment, and to not remain living in that place, not to be defined by that story. And of course that's true for us as individuals, but it's also true for churches. Because churches get a defining story, and sometimes that's good, and sometimes it's terrible. But we need to put that story behind. But really this bit is about the celebrated past, isn't it? See, the New Living Translation says this: forget all that. It's nothing compared to what I'm going to do. Now that sounds much more positive, doesn't it? In Haggai this morning, we were talking about the future glory being greater than the present glory. Well, that's good, isn't it? Each generation's ceiling should be the floor of the one who follows. I'm really excited that actually there's a lot of young people today. That's brilliant. Thank you for coming. I know that you probably didn't want to come out at 7 o'clock on a Sunday night. I really appreciate that you're here, because this is your story. It's your generation. It's your future, but your future starts right now. Not in like 10 years when you're a proper grown-up. It starts right now. Please don't wait, because your future can be greater than what ours was, and we want it to be. SBC, for me, for us, has been a defining story. I got married in the church. Some of you might not know that. We got married, in fact. 23 years ago. Both our kids have been born in Airedale Hospital. This is our defining story. This is where I have, with your help, in every respect, grown and developed and formed the person and the minister that I am. I do not take that for granted, that you have been so generous to me in enabling this to be my defining story. There is so much of our lives that is wrapped up, intricately wrapped up in this place. But God says, forget the past. Now listen, I was in somebody else's church last Sunday, and it hit me like a train. I thought, I don't want to be here. I want to be here. It's not easy, is it, to leave that behind you, but God has said to his people about their big defining story, put it behind you. And this season which we have shared together, God says, put it behind you. Because there's better to come. There's better to come. My hope is, and I said this back in June, is that I hear more exciting, more dynamic, more thrilling stories of what God is doing than ever I heard when I was here. That is my hope, because we worship a God who keeps on being with us into the future and doesn't need us to go back to the past to find our worth and our value and who we are. And then he goes on and he says, in the Message version, be alert, be present, but I'm going to swap them around. First of all, pardon me, can't see. Be present. Well, it's quite hard to be present, isn't it? How many of you sat here thinking about something else right now? Oh, that was quite a lot of people. How many of us at home in our conversations, and I get told off for this, not being in the moment? It's hard, isn't it, to be present? To be present. So many distractions. It's so easy to look back. It's so easy to look forward. I feel like this was a word that God really spoke to me in these last few days. When I kind of wanted to look back, but then I thought, well, no, I need to look forward, but that was frankly even more terrifying than looking back. And it was like, actually, you need to be present. You need to be present. You need to be in this moment. In this moment where, as Catherine put it so well this morning, God says, I'm with you. Where God says, I am here. Where God says, I am for you. And I know there's like a massive temptation on my part, probably on yours, to kind of worry about what the future's going to be. How's it all going to work out? Who's going to do everything? And how's that all going to look? And what's it going to look like? Be present. Be present. In this moment, worship God. In this moment, listen to what he's saying. In this moment, remember that he's with you. And don't look back and don't look forward too far. Because God says be present. But he also says, pay attention. Be alert. And there is that commitment, isn't there, to be involved in this moment. I don't just mean in terms of filling in one of the snazzy volunteer forms that you now have an opportunity to fill in, although I do mean that. But it is actually just about committing yourself in your heart, in your spirit, in your intentions, to be involved, to notice what's going on, what God is doing, what's happening with His church, to be actively looking and listening for what He's doing and saying. Paying attention is about the sacrifice of time and of other things in our lives. That's just what paying attention looks like. So what God needed them to know was that He was doing a new thing. He was about to do a new thing. Well, in our personal lives, that is utterly true, and it is frankly exciting and terrifying depending on which moment you happen to speak to me. But God is calling us into something new. It's also true for the UK church. Not just Skipton Baptist Church or any other church that you may frequent, but the UK church. That God is saying, I'm about to do something new. And it would be so sad just to sink back into what we always knew. It's not to say that everything about that will be stripped away, because that would just be stupid, wouldn't it? But that we need to look to what is new and that God is doing now for this season, for this time. We are not the people that we were 18, 20 months ago. We are not the church that we were then. We need to see what God is doing now. So are we able to celebrate the past, see how it has formed and defined us, but also leave it behind and look to see what God is doing? So this week, I felt like it was a moment. It was a moment to have a full-on, super-duper eye test. With the price tag to match, I should say. So I went to Benjamin's, of course, because that's where you go when you need a super-duper eye check. And they check what you can see, which is good on an eye test, isn't it? And you have to sort of try and remember your letters, which you realise that you can't remember. You say the wrong thing, it's really embarrassing. And they check your eye health. They get very close to you, it's very odd. And they have these special, exciting machines where they can check behind your eyes and seemingly see what's in your brain, which is also very worrying, although there wasn't much to see. The bottom line is that my perception is not as I thought. The truth is that I can't see anything through these glasses. I can't really see my notes and I can't really see you either. Because, well, my prescription changed. On the bottom half, these don't even have a bottom half, they just have one whole bit. And the top half. And the left eye is worse than the right eye. I mean, it's all good news, really. Anyone wants to make a donation, I would be gratefully received. The thing is that sometimes our perception is just wrong, isn't it? And we haven't noticed. Because it's gradually crept up on us. And so I'm used to not being able to see anything really, so I didn't really notice it was a big deal. And I wonder how well we can perceive what God is doing. And I wonder whether our spiritual glasses have got a bit blurred, a bit out of focus. We actually haven't checked to see if we're doing okay, and actually we can see properly. And it's very distracting, and sometimes, frankly, we just, I can see much better than my glasses. We put our hands over our eyes because we don't want to see anymore. We don't want to see what's ahead of us. We don't want to see what God is doing. We get like distracted over here and over here, and we don't look to see what God is doing. And He asks us, can you perceive it? Do you know what God is saying right now? Do you know what God is doing in our town, in our nation, in the world right now? Do you see that? Are you looking? Do you wonder? Have you spoken to God about it? Not just what do I want, but what are you saying? What are you doing, and how might I be involved with that? So, finally, it says that he is making a way in the wilderness. He's making streams in the desert, in the wastelands. Well, those things are a bit odd, really, aren't they? Like, why would God do that? But he's making a way for them to go home, to be the people that he wants them to be. And he's making streams in the desert because life is bursting out there. And I don't know how you feel, but I feel it's been a bit of a wasteland, a bit of a wilderness this last 18 months. But even there, God can be making streams in the desert, and life is bursting out. And we've seen, haven't we? People, some of you are brand new and you came to church whilst there was no church. Some people have prayed for the first time because suddenly they've been faced with all sorts of questions about life. Some people have come to know Jesus for the first time. In the desert, in the wilderness, God has been doing things. His life has been bursting out. And we need to keep watch for the unexpected. For the miracles of life bursting out in unexpected places. And it says in this passage about the jackals and the owls, the wild animals, being grateful. And I was like, I have no idea what that's about. But then I thought, well, it seems to me that that's maybe about the marginalised, the animals that are unclean. It's like God is saying, this is not just for the people that are clean, already part of my people, but actually my life is going to spring out for those who are on the edges, who are beyond the edges, who are marginalised, who are not easily accepted. We need to perceive and look for what God is doing in the unexpected places, in the wilderness place, in the place of wasteland and devastation, because that's where God's life always comes first. And if it looks unexpected, well, it strikes me that's probably of God. Perhaps we need to get a little bit more excited about that. So here we are, at the end of a period of wilderness, desert, dry, barren. I think for many of us it's felt very like that. But God is going to do something new. And he says it's for the people that he formed for himself. Maybe we've forgotten that because we talk a lot about meeting for church. But actually, isn't this not a privilege to be part of the people that God formed for himself? And church is just an expression of that. Church, whether it is in England or Scotland even, is just an expression of that, of what God has done with the people that he's formed for himself. And he does it so that we might declare his praise. It's been lovely tonight, because some people have come in, you might still be here. You just heard the music and came in. Brilliant, welcome. And some people came, they stood at the door for a bit because they heard the music. There's something about proclaiming the praise of God, and I know it's more than our singing, but in our lives and everything that we are, which brings people to look at Jesus. And that always has to be about that, doesn't it? And so that's it really. I suppose the message is this. We've been part together of a defining story, the big story of God, but also this, in eternal terms rather than short term, in my life terms relatively long, defining story, but actually his moment of saying, let's celebrate, let's remember, let's be grateful to God for all that he has done amongst us in that period of time. But please, let's not dwell there. Let's not stay there. Let's use that as a springboard for everything else that God has for this church. This church is amazing. Honestly, I don't say that easily. It has been the hardest thing ever to leave. It is amazing. The team here is utterly incredible. The deacons, some of you are still on it, some of you that have sat in the room have been on the diaconate with me this time. Amazing, amazing. But we can't go back, we have to go forward because God has new things for this church, in this town, in this period. And you sat in this room, and part of that story. And you need to look to see what the Spirit is doing here, right now, and join in with that. And jump up and down, be a bit enthusiastic, celebrate, proclaim the praise of God. Because He is with you and He is for you. And He is with me and us and for us as well. Because that's how amazing God is, isn't it? I think I'm going to stop.